We'll begin. Do we have all of the staff we're supposed to have? Or are you doing it all there? So anyway, we have Mr. Buscaino, O'Farrell, Mr. Price, and myself, so we have a quorum. We can get started. Why don't you read the first item?
And there's one item on this morning's special agenda, and that is a CAO and CLA report relative to LA24's efforts in preparing all requisite bid materials for the 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games related to Stage 2 governance, legal and venue funding considerations that need to be submitted to the International Olympic Committee before October 7th, 2016.
Okay, thank you very much. So I guess I want to get the CLA, CAO, City Attorney, and if I can get a representative from LA 2024 to come to the center table, we'll get started. Hey, Drew. Okay, why don't, who wants to begin?
I'll go ahead and start.
Okay, wait 1 second. Can I get, Sharon, can I get you to start?
Certainly.
Please.
Good morning. Sharon So with the CLA's office with me. I'll have them identify themselves.
Gene Sykes from LA24.
Miguel Santana, CAO.
Jim Clark, Chief Deputy City Attorney.
So the item before you is a joint CAO-CLA report and recommendations related to the proposed bid for the 2024 Summer Games. The report before you identifies recommendations for this committee's approval related to the Stage 2 guarantees that would be submitted in October of 2016. Items for you for consideration are approval of the Joint Marketing Program Agreement, authorizing the Mayor and Council President to submit on behalf of the City. Additional approval requirements are concurrence with both the Rec and Parks and Convention Center venue use agreements and guarantees. Council concurrence is required for these items to be submitted as part of Stage 2. Also, instructions to our offices to work with Rec and Parks and the Convention Center to address any negative impacts that could arise from these venue use agreements, and also instructing our offices to report back to this committee on identifying any risk mitigation strategies related to other participating agencies in the upcoming games. We are all here to answer any specific questions. Rec and Parks is here as well as Convention Center staff, and we can answer any specific questions you may have.
Miguel.
No, just to add to Sharon's conversation, what's before you is a number of recommendations, but this doesn't complete the work. We continue to work very closely with the Mayor's Office, with LA24, to ensure that we're trying to develop a mechanism where cities throughout the region are sharing in the responsibility associated with the games, and certainly the head of LA24 could talk more about what other cities are participating, the changes that have been made since the last time we were before you. But we're working cooperatively to find a mechanism to ensure that that the city is not sharing the risk by itself.
Okay, Jim, or whoever.
Mr. President, I'm sorry, I forgot to make one correction. There is a correction on item recommendation number 4 of our committee report, and we would strike the word approve and insert the words concur with the Board of Los Angeles Convention and Tourism Development Commission. I'm sorry, Jim.
Okay, Jim.
Only one thing, Mr. President, that is the 6th recommendation has to do with identifying potential mechanisms to mitigate any risks from hosting the games. and request our office to participate in that. We, of course, will do that. We've been working very closely with the CLA and CAO's office throughout this process, and I think it's been a fairly seamless cooperation.
Mr. Sykes, you want to jump in on this?
Yes, I'm happy to give you a bit of an update on what we've done, if you don't mind.
Please.
First of all, I appreciate the opportunity to see you all this morning. It's been just over 12 months since we officially launched the LA24 bid into the international competition for the 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games. Over that time, we've been pleased to work very closely with the CAO, the CLA, the city attorney, the council, and the mayor's office. We recently returned from Rio, where we were there for both the Olympic and the Paralympic Games. We sent teams to both. We listened and learned from global sports leaders and connected with IOC members and participated in the IOC and the International Paralympic Committee's observer programs. So we had a chance to see behind the scenes and understand how the Olympic Games are actually delivered. It gave us great insight and made us more confident about the approach we're using ourselves.
Your staff wasn't hanging out with Ryan Lochte, was it?
Our staff wasn't close to Ryan Lochte, thank goodness. Our plans and our vision for LA24 actually reflect the IOC's Olympic Agenda 2020 reforms. This, by the way, will be the first candidate process where that Olympic Agenda 2020 is part of the process. We believe our high technology, low risk, sustainable bid is the right bid at the right time, at the right place for the IOC, and we believe our bid, which relies on existing venues to reduce costs, is right for the city of Los Angeles. As you know, LA24 enjoys very significant public support, somewhat unprecedented. The LMU poll showed 88% support from Angelenos for the Olympics. We have participated in more than a dozen community meetings, and we will continue our commitment to attend meetings in every council district. I must say, every input we've had, every feedback we've had from people who have talked to us about the Olympics has been positive. So the level of community enthusiasm in the city of Los Angeles continues to be incredibly impressive to us, and we're quite gratified by it. We've made very, very good progress, but we've got a long way to go. We've won nothing yet. Our European competitors are very formidable, so we will keep working hard, remaining quite disciplined, and stay humble in our quest to bring the Games back to the U.S. The second part of our application is due next Friday, October 7th. This is the Stage 2 deliverable that's been described to you. It contains an updated venue plan, which I'll talk about. We publicly announced it last week. Now, we have two goals for our sports venues. The first goal is to offer the best locations for the athletes and the international sports federations, which oversee the sports, all of the Olympic sports. These sports federations are very influential with the IOC voters. The second goal is to use existing world-class facilities, putting sports where they fit best in Southern California. This will allow us to reduce costs and reduce the risk of hosting the games, and it's the same strategy that was employed quite successfully in 1984. The deliverable also contains a number of guarantees and agreements from venue operators and cities where the venues are located. Finally, the deliverable contains our joint marketing program agreement with the U.S. Olympic Committee. We call this the JMPA. This outlines our combined marketing activities between LA24, if we are selected to host the Games, and the U.S. Olympic Committee from 2019 through 2024. In effect, we create a joint venture that we run, that is LA24 runs the joint venture, but we take responsibility for all marketing activities related to the Olympics in the United States during this time frame. This agreement we negotiated with the USOC. We believe it's a fair agreement that will help us stage a fiscally responsible Games. We appreciate our ongoing relationship with the city family. We are finishing the budget workshops and will present our Games budget in the months ahead, which will be independently reviewed. We return to our international travel in the month of November, when the bid team will make our first presentation as a team to the Olympic family at the Association of National Olympic Committees General Assembly, which takes place in Doha, Qatar. Then we meet with the IOC administration about the next deliverable in Lausanne, Switzerland. and later travel to Tokyo for a debrief on the Rio Games. So we're very much engaged in this international process of being in front of the IOC constantly, honestly, and that will continue to be the case until September next year when the vote takes place in Lima, Peru. We look forward to returning to Council in the months ahead to brief you on our activities and to discuss our final submission to the IOC, which is due in February. Thank you very much.
Okay, before I ask the members to jump in, I just have a couple of quick questions. I mean, all of us here agree that we want to be as transparent as possible. So, I don't want to say this as a concern, but I want to find out, when did we finish the reports? When were they ready? Was it Friday?
The report was released on Monday, I believe.
Okay. So let me ask, go back to Eugene. I know we're scheduled to deal with this today. Let's say I made a suggestion to the members that we don't deal with this today. We deal with it on Friday. We give another couple of days for folk to review all of this stuff or the reports. That would not adversely affect our timing, correct? I need guidance.
I don't think so. No.
Okay, just, we just want to make sure that everybody's afforded an opportunity to, review this and elevate their comfort level. Now, if we approve this, I'm still going to recommend that the committee move forward. Okay, that I will do. But what's next? Let's say we approve this, then what's, the next set of things?
So what's next is we're continuing to work with LA24 to comply with its IOC Stage 2 submission deadlines. We're continuing to work with them on a budget, and we hope to present that budget for your consideration by the end of the calendar year.
Okay. Now, another thing that I'm just curious about is there are agreements between the Convention Center and Rec and Parks? And what are in those? Is there anything that we should highlight?
So both of those reports have been submitted to their respective boards for approval. The agreements in themselves outline the terms and conditions of the use of those facilities, as well as the time periods, and as well as compensation to both Recreation and Parks and Convention Center. The compensation plans do provide for full cost recovery for all of the venues, and there also is provisions for adjustments and true-ups later in the process.
Okay, and then I think the last, I won't even call it an area of concern, just something that I'm curious. One of the things that I don't know if we're doing this just because it broadens our appeal, or if it just makes sense because we want to incorporate other cities and other jurisdictions in the LA County region in this endeavor. But I'm curious about the guarantees. I mean, if we're going to do something in the city of Inglewood, is there not a way that all of us, I mean, since they will benefit, is there not a way that all of us could share in the pain in the event that something were to occur? And I don't know how you do all of that, but I think that it's important that if we ante up, that there should be a mechanism in place where they can help us in the event that something did not go the way as planned. And I know I would believe that this committee would have an interest in that, and I know that this chair would have an interest in that.
We understand your concern, your interest. Just to explain what we've done in order to keep the cost low and to make sure that we have the most fiscally disciplined bid, we're trying to use existing facilities somewhat regardless of where they are, if they will make the games easier for us to deliver, easier for us to host, and more attractive to the IOC members who have to vote for our city. So having existing facilities in a community which is close to the city of Los Angeles and in the greater Los Angeles area has made great sense for the plan. That was reinforced by what we saw in Rio in terms of how the Rio venues were laid out. So we think we actually make the plan stronger and less risky, which is really the objective we have. Our view is our responsibility to the city is to never call in the guarantee and to have a very fiscally disciplined, very tight proposal that then we can work with and not have any risk. And the way to do that is to use facilities that already exist as opposed to trying to build something new or adapt something that doesn't work.
Miguel.
And that's certainly been helpful through this process. In addition to that, I think what we've been talking to LA24 is how do you create a mechanism to ensure that the city isn't providing guarantees to other municipalities. As you stated, well, we certainly hope that there isn't that situation that arises. We want to make sure that should we get the games, that there is a mechanism in place, at least a protocol in place, to ensure that those cities or venues in other cities that take on this responsibility take care of the costs associated with those venues. LA24, the mayor's office, and the city was successful in already getting some protection from the state of California as a way of providing a backstop in the event of. So there's already a number of different ways, including the insurance that they will be.
Well, wouldn't the cities, I mean, if I'm, again, and I'm not picking on Inglewood, I love Inglewood, but I'm Inglewood, I want to host some games, I would not have a problem in, being part of a guarantee because I'm going to benefit. So, I mean, are we getting cooperation from other cities that, want to be a part of this? Or I guess I don't quite understand how all of that works. If we're over in Santa Monica and something goes awry, their building blows up, falls apart, does that mean we have to pay for that? Or they? So that's what I'm trying to get at now.
There isn't anything in place to that effect yet, and I think that's one of the recommendations that we need to work towards those mitigation strategies, especially now as some of the venue changes that are taking place. More of the venues now, a few of the venues have moved out of LA, and so to the extent that some of these additional jurisdictions are participating in the games, I think we really do need to work towards a solution towards that. In the event that there are any financial liabilities or other third-party liabilities that could occur, as the CAO indicated, certainly LA doesn't want to be on the hook for other municipalities.
Well, I just don't think that we should be. Okay, I don't think that we should be. So I will trust that as you move forward in the negotiations, that this will be part of the conversation. And then another, I don't know, I'm just assuming there might be additional public safety concerns or what have you moving forward. How do we deal with all of that? I know a significant percentage of it, we get help from the federal government, but help walk me through that. I just have a feeling we're going to have to do more.
So we've already had discussions with the appropriate agencies of the federal government and received their assurance that if we're selected as the host city, that these games will be designated a national security special event, what's called an NSSE event, which is the highest level of security appropriate for this sort of thing. And the federal government will take responsibility for coordinating all security and frankly managing transportation that relates to security as well. So that discussion has both begun. We've received the right level of assurances from the federal government that they understand their responsibilities. Okay,
Mr. Krikorian. Oh, and members, just wave your hand or blink at me if you want to say something. But we have been joined by Mr. Cedillo and Mr. Bloomingfield and Mr. Krikorian. Mr. Krikorian, I kick it over to you.
I have a bunch of questions, but just for now, I just want to have a quick follow-up to your point, Mr. President, and that is on risk sharing. And I couldn't agree with you more. I just think it's important that we delineate there's at least two different kinds of risk sharing that we need to be mindful of. One is the kind you described, some sort of casualty that happens, a building collapses, a truck goes through a barricade or something like that. I'm assuming that, as in our venue agreements, the standard provision is that there's $10 million in liability insurance coverage that every specific municipality will provide if they are the venue owner for liability. Is that right?
Let me just reassure you, every venue operator that we're talking about is a venue operator which is in business, and we're in effect one of their customers for the Olympic Games. This is their standard procedure, and we're going to deal with them on a very commercial basis. And that is the approach we've taken, which means we'll need to have all the protection that any operator would have, any game sponsor, any league, for example, anybody who's operating in that venue. We expect to receive that. The second thing I'd say is that as part of our overall game strategy, the approach that we've taken is to have the lowest risk, most fiscally disciplined approach at every moment. And our objective is to have a games that is easier to deliver. We believe that by taking this approach and by building as little as possible, we actually will have the lowest possible risk of delivery. The guarantee from the city is it's not a financial guarantee, it's a delivery guarantee. Now, once we're selected, we have complete control over how we deliver the games. The IOC can give us direction, they can tell us what they prefer, but if we find that we need to make adjustments in order to protect against either risk or financial loss, then we have the flexibility to do that. And the city stands behind us with a delivery guarantee, but it's not a financial guarantee in a traditional sense.
Okay, sorry, my question is actually much narrower than that. There's at least two kinds of risk here. One is financial shortfall. One is catastrophe. I'm very confident that LA24 is moving forward with a fiscally responsible plan, and we're minimizing the fiscal shortfall risk. But we'll deal with that when we have a host city contract and we determine whether or not the city is making commitments to share in that risk. And at that time, I would fully expect that there's state and other municipal participation in that financial shortfall risk. But there's another kind of risk, and that's the risk of catastrophe. And in that regard, LA24 is providing, as I understand it, $10 million in liability coverage or casualty coverage per venue. Is that right? So whether it's in Santa Monica or in Sepulveda Basin or elsewhere, LA24 has an insurance obligation to protect the city, whatever city that venue may be in.
Correct.
Okay. And at some point, I'm going to want the opinion of the CAO on whether $10 million is enough coverage for something of this magnitude, and whether that is cumulative or if it's venue specific. So, but I just wanted to follow up on that point. I'm sorry to detract from the conversation. I just wanted to get that point clear, Mr.
Okay. Mr. O'Farrell? Oh, wait, I didn't hear you, Jim. We're having a technical glitch.
I feel like Donald Trump, but yeah. Always, Mr. Krikorian, always. All I wanted to say is the guarantees are between the city of Los
Jim,
Angeles.
you almost sent all of us off on like a half-hour tangent.
Because I couldn't think of a bigger contrast, actually.
Thank you. I regard that as a compliment.
So go ahead.
Anyway, the guarantees are between the city and the Olympic Committee, IOC ultimately. The other cities that are hosting venues are not parties to the contract. We would do everything, and we've talked about this, to make sure they're not what are called, for the non-lawyers, third-party beneficiaries, where a contract is between two people and a third party has a right to sue or proceed or claim under that contract. So they are not, again, legal terms, they're not privity for the contract, and I think we can avoid that on that basis. So if a building collapses in Santa Monica, that would be Santa Monica's problem.
I guess basically what I'm saying, it is important for us. It is important not just for this committee, but for this council to put forward the best possible arrangement, deal, whatever the hell you want to call it. And that's why we want to make sure the I's are dotted, T's are crossed, and if there's need for shared pain or shared responsibility, we want to make sure that that happens. Because at the end of the day, 8 years from now or what have you, it's our names. And that's why it's so important for all of us. It's the mayor's name. It's our name. We trust you. That's why we have you guys doing the work. But we just want to make sure that we've done the very best we could and we made the best arrangement for the city of Los Angeles. Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Sharon, you had mentioned in your opening remarks full cost recovery for use of recreation parks facilities. Could you elaborate on that? Who pays and what are the components to that?
So the components of it are actually related to the actual use, the exclusive use of the facilities. There's also staffing costs related to that. It does cover for some of the contracts that Rec and Parks already has in place. There is some cost recovery for some of the other revenues that, for example, concessions. They wouldn't be able to operate their concessions, and so there is some cost recovery for that as well. I think Rec and Parks is here, and they can probably provide some greater detail into that. There's also indirect costs reimbursements for staffing as well.
And the cost recovery would come from this joint venture, LA 2024
Yes.
and partners?
Yes.
Is that accurate? Okay. Thank you. That answers that question. Do we know what the status is? Is the governor going to sign SB 1465, the De Leon bill? Because I think there are just a few more days, and that would give a lot of us, I think, a strong sense of confidence in terms of the IOC requirement for, in case there is the, loss, in case we go into the hole with the games.
Yeah, that bill went to the governor in early September. I think it was September 9th. As of yesterday, it had not yet been signed.
And I think the clock is ticking, and we have just a few more days
Yes.
for him to sign that. And that would, I would hope that the governor will sign that, because this isn't an Olympics just for Los Angeles. It's an Olympics for the state, for the region, for the country. I would hope that he would agree with our Senate and Assembly that this is a prudent and good thing for the state to do, especially since we're all pretty sure there won't be a deficit in these games because of the great work that the committee has been doing. But we don't know. We don't know if he's going to sign it or not, and then we won't have that extra, I think, sense of confidence for that requirement on should the games run a deficit. So what exactly, in moving forward with this today and the full city council agreeing to this at this stage, what does this obligate us to? And then the next piece, which Miguel talked about in terms of end of the calendar year, for basically us agreeing to be the host city with all of the requirements that go with that for the February deadline for the IOC. Take us through what we would be deciding on at this juncture and what kind of obligations that leaves us with, and then the last bite of the apple, the final decision that we would be making in December.
You want me to try it? Okay. So what is before you today is the Stage 2 submittal, and as part of Stage 2, these are the venue use agreements that LA 24 would need to submit for the next stage. In addition to that, there is also the joint marketing program that would require approval, and a couple additional recommendations related to directions to your city staff to continue to work towards Stage 3. Now, one important difference in Stage 2 is that originally the host city contract, which is the financial commitment that you'll be making, that has actually been pushed forward to Stage 3. And so that will be coming forward to you early next year for approval. As part of your council direction, you instructed that the city hire an independent expert to review that budget prior to your consideration of that host city contract. So what will be happening in the next few weeks is CAO has already issued an RFP. A consultant has been selected. We are already in contract negotiations to hire that expert to review the LA 24 budget. And so the results of that review will also be coming to this council for approval as part of that Stage 3 review.
All right, and that'll be wrapped up and decided in one action.
Yes, and as you instructed, you required that review take place at least 30 days prior to that February 3rd submittal. So we intend to bring a report back to you sometime in December.
Got it. All right, so we'll wait with bated breath on if the governor is going to sign that bill. We hope he will. If he doesn't, we need to be very creative on what kind of, how the city can meet its IOC requirement of guaranteeing the cost overruns to the tune of $250 million. And I feel very passionately that I don't want to put that on the backs of taxpayers. And I'm equally passionate about getting the games. I love the Olympics. I think the committee's doing an amazing job, and I congratulate all of you. But I think we're going to have to be very creative on how we reach that indemnification piece. And I would ask LA 2024 committee to consider helping with that in terms of cobbling together the funding, entering into an MOU with the city, or other creative ways that we can fulfill that requirement from the IOC without having to go to LA taxpayers. So I would love for that to be explored, and if the governor will sign that bill, then we'll have a lot less to worry about in that regard, and we'll keep our fingers crossed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And before I call on the next member, I do have public comment cards. I want to deal with that now. Alex, if I can get you and John to come up. Alex Davis from VICA and John from CCA. Come on. Why don't you just put a minute up there, but we'll be flexible. Go on, good to see you.
Great, thank you. Good morning, and great to see you guys as well. My name is Alex Davis. I'm with the Valley Industry and Commerce Association, VICA, and we are proud to be here in support of LA 24 and their request before the committee today. We believe the Olympics are great not only for the Valley because of the Valley Cluster and their commitment to bring events into the Valley, but because it'll be great for the city and for California. We will be welcoming guests from around the world into our communities. We see a substantial opportunity for further economic development and for infrastructure improvements, including transportation, which we all know is very important in Los Angeles. So we're excited to be here today. It's a great time for Los Angeles and for California. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Good morning. I'm John Howell with the Central City Association. Let me again reiterate CCA's full-hearted support of this bid. We had the opportunity at the end of last year to have Janet Evans, the chair of the Athletes Committee of LA 24, come and speak to our group. And if LA 24 just sends her down, it's impossible to see this not being a successful bid. She is an amazing woman. Would like to thank you all for your diligence in reviewing the potential exposure of the city here and in other venues, looking at liabilities down the long run. Thank you for keeping the taxpayers' interests at heart. Would also like to say that for the city to benefit to the maximum amount possible, we must have a sufficient number of hotel rooms built in this city going forward. Downtown has plans for potentially thousands of those. However, we ask that the council and committee look at situations upcoming with some ballot initiatives and otherwise that could threaten the creation of those hotel rooms and what impacts those may have. With that, I'll wrap up and say thank you for your good work.
Okay, thank you. And to, since I have Miss Big Jim is here and Dave, I'm going to end with those two comments. I'm ending public comment on this item. So public comment, Streff, is closed. No special meeting. There's no general. Okay, with that, Steve. No, Joe. Yeah, if you hear Steve, go to Buscaino's mic.
Cue Mike.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, of course, I feel, and I want to echo what Mr. Alfaro said about ensuring that we get the support from the governor in signing SB 1465. The California League of Cities took a support position on SB 1465. I would encourage the mayor to lob a call to the governor and say sign it today. Secondly, I also feel that the city of Los Angeles is best suited to host the games in 2024. I also feel that a gold medal has been taken away from San Pedro with the venue change. We were excited to host sailing, and I feel that the committee owes explanation as to why sailing was removed in a time where we are doing everything we can to bring development to the LA waterfront. In fact, the entire cluster was removed, harbor cluster. And I know Mr. Sykes and others on your team, we had in-depth discussion as to why, but I believe we owe it to the people, especially in the harbor area communities, that when sailing was introduced and announced, we were all high-fiving each other and celebrating. So if I can ask why, just for purposes of full disclosure, why sailing was removed from the San Pedro area.
Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to discuss that briefly. As I said, venue changes that we've made since our original plan have all been made in coordination with discussions with the international sports federations that govern the Olympic sports. And in the case of sailing in particular, the leaders of both U.S. sailing and the World Sailing Federation said to us they very, very strongly suggested that we use Long Beach, which is close to the site of the 84 sailing, in the same area, a place that they are comfortable with and they knew something about, rather than San Pedro. And our choice, our decision to do that was to reflect an interest in making sure that we satisfied them. Our approach has been to show the sports federations that our Southern California community has so much opportunity to accommodate the various sports with multiple choices about where we can locate sports venues, because we have a rich wealth of sports venues to choose from, that if they prefer very strongly that their sport will be better featured, better operated, be better for spectators, do more for their sporting community, they're the people who make a difference to us today in winning the bid. And our strategy has to be about winning between now and September of next year. After September of next year, if we do win, we're going to have lots of capacity to do things that will involve the entire community, and that is our deep commitment to this council. We expect to do things that affect every one of the council districts in a positive way.
I appreciate
even
that.
if we've had to make those sorts of changes.
Listen, colleagues, we need to land these games, and if we're going to take one for the team, let San Pedro take one for the team to ensure these games come to Los Angeles. However, let's not forget about the commitment that was made to ensure that we have some role along the LA waterfront. So I appreciate the explanation and look forward to when we land these games, we can look at maximizing the LA waterfront as a destination for these games. And to the Transportation Committee, I understand there was in the report, committee's been formed on parking, traffic, transportation. Looks like a working group has been identified. Can you share with us who makes up that working group? Seems like LA24 has formed a transportation working group comprised of representatives from the relevant public entities across the region. Just want to make sure we have a comprehensive selection of those sitting on that group. Obviously, the movement of people and traffic is going to be critical if we host these games, especially in a time where we're expanding our public transportation systems. Is anyone at the table?
Yeah. LA24 has actually formed this work group recently, and it is our understanding that it includes the staffing from our Department of Transportation as well as folks from Metro and other local jurisdictions. So I think that is still in process, and so they are working towards a joint transportation plan, a regional transportation plan.
And lastly, the RFP on the independent financial analysis. So Miguel, you're leading that effort. Just want to make sure it's truly an independent analysis and it's not going to come back to what we want to hear, because obviously it's collective effort here to make sure that we get these games, but also want to make sure that it is an independent analysis from a third party.
That's correct. We're doing it in coordination with the CLA and the city attorney to make sure that it is in fact an independent analysis. We do this all the time. We have a number of different bidders who are interested in this work. We're narrowing down the choices at this time, but the client essentially will be the CLA and my office, who will be providing direction and then reporting to you their findings.
Well, again, thank you so much for coming to us. I believe, again, if you look at what we have to offer, we have an all-star team. This definitely, I feel, is going to be the most profitable games that the Olympics have seen since 1984. So bring the games home. Thank you.
You know, Mr. Buscay, makes a good point where, we have to land the games, we have to win the games. But I do have, not concerns, but I want to make sure that we maximize the city of LA's resources, as he has concerns, or we all have concerns, where it relates to the harbor and the port area. For me, I saw that we are going to switch the golf venue, or there was conversations about that from our own Griffith Park, to Riviera, and trust me, that is night and day. But I mean, who makes these recommendations to us? And I mean, we hear they want something and we just jump to it. How do we evaluate all of that? Because I do think that in the event that it would have been at Griffith Park, that after the Olympics, people from all over would have come, wanted to play at Griffith Park. I do believe we would have got a much-needed upgrade of the golf course at Griffith Park. And I know it needs an upgrade because I usually destroy it twice a month. On a good month. But I am a little curious about that, Mr. Sykes.
So there were two factors here. One was that the cost of restoring the Griffith Park Wilson Golf Course, which was the original intended golf venue, and rebuilding and expanding the clubhouse to accommodate a major event like the Olympic golf course would be a very substantial cost. The Riviera Country Club people came to us and said they would offer their venue for no cost. So it was obviously very advantageous in terms of how much it would cost us and what the risk was. Probably even more important is that the Golf Federation, again, the International Sports Federation, golf is brand new in the Olympic Games in Rio. They were very, very nervous about the execution of a new golf course in Rio. And when we told them our plan was to restore a golf course, they said, please don't do anything that involves any risk. We would rather have you use a golf course that exists today that we're familiar with. Why can't you use Riviera? And they said to us, we'd much prefer that because then we know that the people who consider coming here to play golf have played the golf course before, they know it, they're comfortable with it, and we don't want any risk because we're worried about whether the Olympics will kick us out. And so you will help us to the extent you submit Riviera as your choice as opposed to Wilson. So it was pretty clear to us that in order to satisfy the people who had the most influence on the vote, we had a choice, and we had a choice that actually saved us millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars. So it was straightforward for purposes of the bid to do this. So that's really the background in terms of this change.
Okay, sorry, Mike. We could have got a brand new clubhouse and a lot of good stuff over there. I gave it to college to try. Mr. Price?
Thank you, Mr. President. I, too, just want to thank the committee for an extraordinary job. You're still help making sure we put our best foot forward, and so appreciate the efforts of the committee and the city family and coming together, collaborating. I'm personally excited that there will be a number of venues in the new ninth. The Bank of California Stadium, the new soccer stadium, and we're excited about the preliminary moves of the games there. Of course, the Coliseum and SC, excited about their role, and the Convention Center. And just a quick question, I see that again, we're going to be, well, the guarantee, one of the agreements, I should say, the exclusive use period for the use of the venue. How do we evaluate the cost? Is it just a normal, whatever the rental fee is? Is there a special rate we give the committee? We'll just submit a bill at the end of the period. Any idea how much that is? I'm just kind of curious on that specific venue.
Why don't we invite the convention center to come and answer that question?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Just want to get some information on the agreement for use of the convention center. I know there's a cost recovery. I'm just curious, is it at a normal rate, or we give them a discounted rate, or is it a special rate, or do we have an idea how much that's going to be? Does it take into account the business that won't be going on at the convention center? Just kind of curious on that venue specifically, how the deal was made.
Okay. First, Diana Mangiolo for the Convention Center. So when we first sat down with LA24 and developing a cost recovery formula, we took into consideration what their needs were, what their requirements were. And so some of their requirements are that they need to be able to retain, number one, exclusive use of the entire facility for a certain period of time, which means that for a 4-month period of time, we will not be able to utilize our building in any other way. We wouldn't be able to operate it in any other way. So we wouldn't be able to sell parking for, let's say, Staples games. We wouldn't be able to host any other clients. There would be no other mechanism for us to collect revenue, number one. Number two, LA24 needed to, the Olympic Games would require that they retain all the revenue from food and beverage. So with these revenue, with these factors, we took into consideration that we wouldn't be able to approach this as we would normally do in terms of charging a client, because we only rely on our operating revenues. We rely on our food and beverage, parking revenues, utilities to help pay for all of our expenses. So instead what we did was we looked at a 4-month period of time. We looked at it over a period of 3 years, and we looked to see what our revenues were, average number in terms of revenues, average of expenses, and we required that we be reimbursed for full cost so that at the end of the day, we would not be in the red. We would not have to rely on general fund. And then as we developed that formula, we also included an escalation factor. So we took into account what our expenses could be in 2024. I mean, it's 8 years away, so we used that rate. But at the end of the day, we developed a monthly rent based on this analysis. And we said that once you pay the monthly rent, once your expenses come in and we see that your expenses may exceed what your rent was, you would have to pay us the difference. So that's the general approach that we took. So that way, even though we wouldn't be able to host other clients, and we wouldn't be able to utilize our parking in any other way, it would still give us an ability to recover for all of our costs. In terms of other, I think you asked about other, well, let me ask you, does that answer your question?
That basically answers the question. It sounds like a very thorough, well thought out approach, averaging it out. But still curious, so do you have any idea what's that amount, what does that mean? I mean, is that going to be a couple $100,000 or
right.
$50,000? I mean, just any projections? Just curious.
So we used the last 3 years, and if you apply an escalator to that for that 4-month period of time, it could be approximately $12.5 million. And that would cover all of our costs for existing city employees, for employees of our private operator, including employees of our food and beverage provider, and it would pay for whatever requirements and obligations the private operator may have with the contractors, their subcontractors. We also wanted to be fair, so when we looked at our expenses, we weeded out those expenses that were specific to client demands. So, for example, we saw that less than 10%, maybe 5% of our costs were due to specific client demands. So, for example, if a client says, I need 10,000 chairs set up, that would be an additional cost to our existing day-to-day fixed cost. So we weeded those things out, and we just applied a formula based on fixed cost. If the games require additional services, we would charge them for those services.
Thank you.
Mr. Blumenfield?
Thank you. A lot of great questions have been asked and answered already, but a few other additions. And first, I want to also add my thanks for all the hard work that you've been doing and that the team has been doing. I'm very excited about the games coming. I also want to echo all of our concerns that the games be spread throughout the city, as far-flung down at the harbor, but also as far-flung as the West Valley, if possible. We talked a little bit about SB 1465, and I know it's on the governor's desk. And we talked about being creative, but maybe as a way to put a little pressure on our governor. Is it fair to say that if he doesn't sign this bill, that could jeopardize the games coming to Los Angeles? How strong a statement can you make right now on record that will help us put a little pressure on the governor?
Well, for my part, I think the fact of a state guarantee, which would support the guarantee from the host city, is very important evidence of government backing for our games. As you know, we don't anticipate a federal government guarantee, a financial guarantee. That's not possible in the United States. So we have to do the best we can with the governments that are available to us. And the city of Los Angeles and the state of California are both very significant government entities in their own right. If you take away the state of California, one of the things we've been saying is the state is equal to almost any significant country in the world except for just a handful. And when you think about the size and magnitude and financial status of our principal competition, the state is a very significant and very formidable entity. So having the state guarantee makes a big difference to us.
Okay. I guess I'll add to that it would be a terrible message for this bill not to be signed into law, and it could have a dramatic impact, as far as I can see, on our ability to get the games, and frankly, on our ability to, down the road, sign the Stage 3. So I love this governor. He's a great governor, and I trust he's going to do the right thing, but I just wanted to put out there that this is a critical decision, and our fate on the Olympics could hang in the balance, and that's important to state out there. The Rio Games, I know we learned a number of lessons. We talked a little bit about that, and I guess that's why you were alluding the golf venue is potentially changed. What are the other lessons that we have learned from Rio that are impacting our decisions now?
The Rio Games approach, their strategy was to have various parks in various parts of their city and cluster, if you will, many events, many different types of sporting events in each of those parks. That concept is a good concept, and it actually is an ideal concept for us. We can find places where we can put 4 or 5 or 6 events together. It saves money because it's much easier to do all of, if you will, the back-of-house functions that you need to have to host an event once, as opposed to multiple times in multiple independent places. It also makes for a better spectator experience because spectators can go to a park, they can go to different events at different times in the day, and so it makes it much easier to be a host and an effective host. So Rio did that. They did that fairly well. They would have done it better if they'd planned ahead and they'd been, if you will, earlier and smarter about getting to some of their challenges rather than waiting until the last minute. So it's one of the reasons why we're doing so much planning today and thinking about this as many years ahead of the games as we are.
And presumably, we're going to learn a lot of lessons from Tokyo as well, perhaps very different lessons when that happens. And I'm putting this all in the positive as if we're definitely going to get them by then. But I assume that after that, we'll still have the flexibility to make some of these changes. Maybe we'll learn then that Griffith Park makes more sense as a golfing area, or it's because of something that happens there. So are there things that we're locking in here that we won't be able to undo after the lessons of Tokyo become clear?
If Los Angeles is selected as the host candidate city, then it's up to the organizing committee, together with its partners, to deliver the games. We're practically given a great deal of flexibility in order to do that. We're not going to be disingenuous and say to the IOC we intend to do something and then simply change our approach because we feel differently. So I think we have an obligation, but we have to recognize we have an incredibly dynamic community where new venues and new opportunities to use things that are integrated into our community without cost to us and without cost to the taxpayers will make our program better and stronger. And so I think we have to go into this with an attitude of flexibility, recognizing that our community is more dynamic probably than any other community in the world. And so I think we have to have an open mind about that, and we appreciate both the flexibility that people in the city have to understand that and to work with us, and their desire to present the very, very best Olympic Games for the lowest cost and lowest risk possible.
Great, I appreciate that. A legal question. This one, I know, according to the city attorney, did not actually have to be approved by the city council. Could be signed by the mayor and the council president. Obviously, stage 3 is a much bigger deal, and we're going to have a lot of decision making going up into that one. Does that one have to be approved by the full city council?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, and Godspeed on all the great stuff you're doing.
Mr. Cedillo, did you want to engage the vice chair?
Am I on? I just want to thank the committee. I think everyone has said it. We want zero cost, zero risk, and maximum benefit. So that's your charge. There are two things I want to ask you about. One is this question of security. Obviously, it has to be at the top of our agenda given the global climate. So if you can tell us about that. And then the second is that this, as I go around town, it's extremely popular. And I'm having so many people that I run into, professionals, community people, leaders, activists, a whole range of people who want to find venues and entry points into volunteering. These are people who are judges or lawyers or who are retiring or on the verge of retiring and saying, look, I'm going to have time. I'd really like to participate. I'm willing to do anything. And so I want to figure out how we're going to be able to capture all that human capital. But before that, we need to have a conversation about security and where we're at. I know that this is a lot out of our hands, but this obviously has to be at the top of our agenda.
So thank you very much. On the first topic on security, as I mentioned before, we have done quite a bit of work with the federal agencies that are responsible for security. They have reassured us that they both have the resources and are willing to commit the resources to coordinate and manage security. They've also said to us that we have tremendous resources in our community already, not just our resources, but federal resources that are headquartered and located here. So this is I think a topic that rates very high in our agenda, and we'll frankly never stop giving it very close attention. With regard to your observation about volunteers, it's consistent with what we have all seen and felt ourselves. There's enormous interest in working for the games, on the games, supporting them, and actually we intend to have a volunteer registry where we can collect the names of people who actually want to do these things, make sure that we know who they are so that when we win the games, we can actually activate that volunteer group. There were over 30,000 volunteers for the 1984 games. I would expect that we would have a multiple of that number for our 2024 games.
I'm good, Mr. President.
Okay, Mr. Krikorian, did you still?
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Mr. Mr. President. A couple of things. First, Guarantee 2.11 provides that the city has to guarantee a normal level and range of governmental services offered within its territorial limits and so on. And I'm wondering what that means. And specifically, I'm thinking, for example, of the recent discussion we've had about police services and what's normal with regard to, for example, the Rams games, or Dodger games, or USC and other things. What is a normal level of services when you have an abnormal event going on like the Olympics? And I guess connected with that is, how does that determine who bears the cost?
So in reference to the example that you gave, specifically with the Rams, my office will be issuing a report shortly on what we were able to negotiate. But basically the standard is the but-for standard. So what is beyond the regular patrol, for example, that LAPD would provide the Coliseum on any given day, and what is beyond that, what is enhanced. And so one of the models that is being pursued now is an overtime model, because that's frankly much easier to track and has less of an impact on the rest of the region. And so that's how we establish what the additional impact is in relation to those venues. As it relates to this guarantee, I have to rely on the city attorney if he could be more specific.
What I think our understanding is that the guarantee 2.11 nets out, if you will, Mr. Krikorian, the cost of the normal provision of all the services that are covered, police, fire, sanitation, etc. And it's the but-for cost, the additional cost, the incremental cost that we would not be liable for.
Okay, so just in simple language then, the normal cost of policing around these venues would be what they are right now on a Wednesday afternoon, for example, and anything above that that's necessary because of the Olympics would be borne by the committee.
That's the pattern in which we use now. What we just negotiated with the Rams is exactly that structure.
Okay.
So I do think, Mr. Krikorian, to pick up Mr. Steele's point about the world, in 8 years, who knows what level of security the city will have to provide.
Exactly.
We just
exactly.
don't know.
But I get the concept anyway. All right, so two site-specific issues. One is on the Sepulveda Basin. I've expressed before my concerns about utilization of the Sepulveda Basin and what that means particularly for the protected habitat area, the wildlife reserve there. It does seem, I finally was able to get my hand on a venue map, and it does seem like there's a pretty significant buffer currently between the active areas and where the habitat area would be. But the language of the venue agreement does provide for the venue to be significantly expanded. And I'm not going to need an answer now. I just want to again highlight my concerns about that issue. And if access to these venues, for example, if security buffer zones for this area encompasses the wildlife protected area, that's going to be a larger problem, I think, than it would be for typical venues doing that. So I'm just going to highlight that for now. On the convention center, Ms. Mangiolu was up earlier talking about revenue loss for the convention center. I don't know if there's any way to address this concern, but I look particularly to you, Mr. Santana, because we have spent so much time talking about the economic stimulus benefit of having a convention center. And whether it was the AG proposal or anything else that we've done on the convention center, it has always been about securing citywide conventions, the national level conventions, and keeping them over the course of years. The other day we had a presentation about the Stan Lee Comic-Con, which is permanently committing to Los Angeles. Well, now we're committing to block out the entire convention center for many months, which is going to potentially cause us to lose conventions that we might be able to secure for the next 10 or 15 years. And that's a significant concern of mine. It isn't captured in a full cost recovery model at all. It's a loss that we could suffer for years to come if we lose a nationwide convention that would otherwise be committed to Los Angeles. So I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on that and how we can avoid that. And I guess then to Mr. Sykes, there's a lot of events planned for the convention center. I'm wondering if some of those could be offloaded, for example, to the Galen Center, which right now I think is only set aside for boxing. Galen Center is a great venue. Fight on. I mean, we could have a lot of good things happening at the Galen Center and other places at USC. There are other places within the neighborhood that might be able to take some of that load off, which might minimize the use of the convention center, which might allow some of those conventions to still take place. So anyway, that's my general thought. Mr. Santana, what do you think?
Well, three things. First, there'll be time to plan. So should the city be selected, then obviously LA24 and the city and the convention center will have the opportunity to plan for that. Concurrent, obviously, there's also a conversation taking place regarding the refurbishment of the convention center. And so much of this, the impact is in part related to whether the city proceeds with the refurbishment or not. If there were to be a refurbishment plan, obviously the goal is to minimize the impact on the existing conventions, but there more likely will be some kind of impact, even just as people make decisions as to whether to move forward. So in some ways, there's an opportunity, if these two things come together, that the completion of the refurbished convention center could happen around the same time, and so it sort of creates a reset of a new convention center on forward. The other thing is that should the city receive the games, then we would recommend doing an economic study on the benefit of the games themselves. Obviously, while we would lose some conventions during that period of time, perhaps a few years on both sides of the games, as you pointed out, the goal of having a convention center is so that people utilize our hotels and increase our sales tax and other revenues. And to the extent that the city does host the games, then clearly it would have a benefit on that front. So there could be an offset that's associated on the revenue end of the analysis. And so we would recommend doing that kind of economic study, as we've done in other areas, to determine sort of where the gap is. If there is one, we may end up ahead when you sort of look at it, the pluses and minuses.
And I guess as you talk that through, it's probably unlikely that a national convention organizer would want to have their convention in Los Angeles anytime around the Olympics anyway, because of all of the
and the lack
capacity
of hotels,
issues and so on. Okay, all right. Okay, I think that covers it. And if I don't want to be a nudge on this, so I'm going to say this as gently as I can, but this is the second round of review that I've had to raise the issue of getting, several hundred pages of material to look at the day before I have to exercise my oversight capacity as a council member. And I would ask respectfully that we know our deadlines, and we can't wait until 10 days before our deadline to have our first opportunity to review this. So I just need to, when the host city contract comes before us, I can tell you I'm not going to be able to support something that I haven't had adequate time to review. So,
and Mr. Krikorian, others have expressed same concerns. That's why we're going to vote on it as a committee today, but it won't be in council. We'll have a couple of days to really review it, and then if there's some things we need to discuss on Friday and tweak or whatever, that affords us the opportunity to do that. But I'm with Mr. Krikorian on that. We want this as soon as possible. We are totally about transparency on all of this. Mr. Sykes, I think one of the reasons why we have such a high percentage of people support this is because we've been over backwards, along with the mayor's office, to try to include everybody. So it's just better for us, I think. So anyway, with that said, Madam Clerk, so I guess what the committee would move to support the recommendation as amended?
Correct.
Okay, so without objection, that'll be the order. Is there any additional business before this committee?
That completes
Okay,
all
this
business.
committee is adjourned. Thank you all.